in the child that we lost, which was our second child, was a little boy. We lost him in utero. But that was absolutely a catalyst for my wife and I to really come together. Even as people who are very much in love and had one beautiful child already, that brought us even closer together. And it also ultimately was the catalyst, along with a couple of other hits that all came at the same time, for us to.
Welcome to Men of Abundance, the podcast for those looking to level up their lives by hanging out with some of the greatest leaders and established professionals in our community, living a life of integrity, honor, and the abundance mentality. Prepare to pay it forward with your host, former Army medic turned lifestyle entrepreneur, Wally Carmichael.
What is going on, all of you amazing abundant leaders? I am Wally Carmichael, your founder and host of the Men of Abundance podcast, the Pay It Forward community, proving to you that you can in fact live a life of abundance in family, faith, finances, and fitness. It is Christmas time. I am like a kid during Christmas time, and this year is super exciting because I'm going to have all my boys here and my daughter-in-law, which I absolutely adore. And we are going to have so much fun while they are here. My oldest boy is flying in from Korea. We're super excited about that. And I'm just a big kid anyway, but especially around the holidays, my attitude of gratitude and abundance mindset is just through the roof this time of year. And it's my Christmas wish that yours is too. Today in this conversation, it gets a little deep, but during the kick in the gut moment, but we bring you right back up and we lift you up and we prove to you and show you that you can learn from every single kick in the gut moment. You can learn from your adversities and you can grow from that, and you should grow from that. Adversity, difficult, and obstacles and kick in the gut moments, they're put in our way on purpose. They're there to help us grow. They're a test to help you grow so you can learn from that experience and become more resilient each and every time. So please keep that in mind as you listen to this episode and as you go through your life, whether it's during the holidays or not. And remember this, it is very important to seek out assistance. You cannot figure it out yourself. I cannot figure it out myself. I have multiple coaches and mentors and people that I talk to. I was just with a group of veterans this week, and we were sitting around, and we actually did a Facebook Live all over the world, wherever Facebook is at, and we had a lot of people tuning in to a town hall where our veterans and first responders were talking about what we can do. What is our play? What is our part that we can do as a community to prevent suicide within our communities, whether it's first responders, military, or just anybody in general. And one thing that was unanimous from those who had actually attempted suicide or had suicidal ideology was that somebody or a group of people or even the suicide hotline is actually what saved their lives. They admitted that they themselves would not have been here today had it not been for that person, that group of people, or the suicide hotline. They swear by it, and they say that if they had not made that call, or if that person had not shown up at that point in time, they would not be here today. They could not have done it by themselves. Please don't think that you can handle all of your situations and everything you're going through by yourself. Because listen, you might be a smart person, and I bet you are, but you don't know what you don't know. There's other people that have experienced other things and are able to share with you their experiences or ways for you to cope with the situation that you're dealing with. So please seek that help. Get in a group of people that you can resonate with, you can just have a conversation with. And you don't have to have suicidal ideology to get into these groups. It's healthy to be in groups of people. That's who we are as human beings. We've always been tribal people, tribal beings. It's important for us to be accepted into groups and to accept other people into our lives. And listen, there are many groups out there. You can go to local groups, you can go to meetups, you can get in Facebook groups. There are many Facebook groups you can be a part of, one of which is the Men of Abundance Facebook group. You can go there as men and get access to the Men of Abundance Facebook group. Or consider what hobby you like. If it's RC cars and RC boats and RC planes like me and my boys, then get into those kind of groups. Go out and hang out with those type of people that are doing those hobbies. Whatever hobby it is that you enjoy doing, get into those groups of people and hang out with those type of people. Healthy hobbies and people around you, that is something that keeps your mind on things that excite you and get you motivated and get you to want to thrive and learn more and do things and help other people. Because the more you learn, then you can help other people. And oh, by the way, when you teach somebody a skill, you master the skill. There's a little trick for you. And when you master your skill and teach that to others, you make your community a better place. You make the world a better place. And speaking of making the world a better place, our featured guest today believes that better leaders can create a better world. So he devotes himself professionally to working with leaders to improve themselves and the organizations they lead, all contributing to this overall goal. Tim was raised by leaders, his dad in the military and his mom in education, and found himself in his first formal leadership role at age 11 in one of the UK's leading boys' choirs. Tim progressed on through leadership roles at school and university, where he studied organizational behavior and in his early career worked as a recruiter to help leaders build their careers and organizations to attract better leaders so they could go on and do more. This progressed into consulting and coaching, culminating in him co-founding 4i Group, a Sydney-based leadership development company, in 2016. Tim loves what he does, leading and serving leaders, and is fortunate enough to have worked with a broad spectrum of leaders from corporate CEOs and boards to not-for-profit leaders and up-and-coming leaders across many sectors and countries around the world. Tim considers the journey of learning to lead to be a lifelong one and stands behind his values as the consistent drivers of his leadership success. Men of Abundance, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Tim Collings. Tim, welcome to Men of Abundance, brother. How you doing?
I'm good, Wally. Thank you, mate. Thank you for inviting me here. And yeah, it's great to be here. How are you going?
I'm doing very well. Where are you at in the world?
Okay, so I'm in Australia, and for the closest sort of geographical reference for, my cousins like you, across the big pond in America, I'm a few hours south of Sydney. So I live the equivalent of sort of upstate or downstate, depending on which part of the compass you're at, from a major metropolitan centre. If you want to type it into Google Maps, I live just outside a little town called Nowra, Nowra.
Man, one of these days I'll get to Australia. I was so close when I lived in Hawaii for several years, and I just said, I'm going to get there because I've wanted to get to Australia since I was a kid. I know my listeners have heard me say this so many times, especially every time I talk to somebody who's in Australia. But, it's got to happen.
Come on down. Seriously, I think having listened to a few of your shows, I think you'd really dig the vibe here, and there'd be a lot of good people for you to connect up with, and I'd be happy to sort of be a connector on that point. So whenever you're ready, man, come on down.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate it. So I like to start out with an attitude of gratitude, man. What do you have to be grateful for today?
So I'm actually going to answer this in two ways, if I may. One is some sort of specific call outs, and one is also a general response, which I make to this question when I do receive it from others. And the general response first is that I'm actually sincerely grateful for every moment that I've lived that's brought me here today. Good, bad, traumatic, celebratory. I really have now got myself to a point where I can look at all of my experience as being vectors for learning and progress. And we might talk a little bit more about some of my experiences as we go through the conversation, so I can explore that more thoroughly. But specifically today, I would say that I'm immensely grateful to my wife and my family for their love and their support and their trust and their patience with me and the mission that I'm on. Also to my team in the business that I lead, for their belief, for their sharing my values and our collective values, and for their brilliance, and ultimately to our customers, for allowing us to serve them and to contribute to the journey that they're on.
Yeah, all extremely important to be grateful for, and man, that is a lot to be grateful for. And we're certainly going to get into your the ups and downs that you were alluding to. We're certainly going to get into that. But here on the show, we really like to explore and get to know the man behind the abundance. So, if you would, let's get a little bit more personal. How would you describe yourself?
Yeah, so I have to say I really struggle with this one, and I try and use a cultural excuse for that and sort of say, look, I mean, I've been living in Australia since 2006, but I was brought up in the UK where modesty is a kind of like a primal virtue. So, you ask a British person to describe themselves, and even someone as successful as Richard Branson will kind of go down into themselves a little bit and go, well, I'm not really too sure how I can answer that. But let me try. So, I mean, the easiest way to define myself is sort of functionally. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm an outdoorsman, I'm an entrepreneur, and I try always in all of those endeavors to be a force for good through my own definition of what good is. And then I'm actually going to use a definition which I regard as a high compliment that I received from a sort of a kindred spirit in the leadership world recently. And she described me as an achiever, a leader, and a leader and teacher of leaders. And I think as a concise synopsis, I think that's much better than I could do.
Yeah, that's a very good compliment. And
yeah, I really like it. Yeah, that's from Zoe Routh. She's a fantastic leadership expert here in Australia. And yeah, I was honored to be on her show. She has a podcast of her own as well as very successful leadership practice here. And yeah, that came as an assimilation of the conversation that she and I had. Which I was very, very grateful to receive from her.
What do you think got you to that point? Now, in your bio, you talk a little bit about how you started your first, got into one of your first leadership roles very young. I think 11 years old is one of your first leadership roles. And I was reading through your bio. I was like, man, it sounds pretty familiar. But how do you feel that you receive such a compliment like that as through, like you said, through all of your experiences? But what do you think got you to that point?
Yeah, so look, I think I'm a real kind of on the fencer when it comes to nature and nurture. So I think that I absolutely have faculties and innate capabilities that are appropriate and have now been refined for the purpose of leadership. But then I've also had a hell of a lot of trips along the road and opportunities to learn as I've picked myself up, and I've listened to the people that my experiences have impacted on, and essentially to be nurtured as a leader. So I was raised by leaders. My dad was in the military. He went all the way through a combination of different functions. He was an infantryman. He worked as a secondee to military intelligence, and then he ended up in the sort of the what is now the sort of the data arm of the British intelligence. He was one of the first officers working with having sort of IT infrastructure deployed on the front line as a feedback mechanism, which was in the Bosnian conflict. And then my mum, who's an education leader. So she was a sort of a senior executive in a very large public high school, both in the UK. So I think, early on, as a kid, you're sort of standing there looking up at this world of legs and, loud, dark, deep voices. I was being exposed to a lot of leadership behaviors, either overtly or, sort of subliminally. We'd have senior army officers, coming over to socialize. We'd have my mum, talking with very well-respected senior, sort of leaders in the education world in the UK and elsewhere. And then I think my innate inclination was always to lead, but initially just in the most rudimentary way, just as a disciplinarian. And that early role that you talked to, the 11-year-old one, so that was as a head chorister of a cathedral choir. And that's one of those classic childhood experiences which you really just kind of submit to when you're a kid. Like there's not much that's less cool than putting like a big fluffy ruff under your neck and 5 days of the school week, and on 3 times on a Sunday, and then if there's a wedding or a funeral Saturday as well, rocking up into a big old building and singing for your supper and singing about God and Jesus and stuff, right? Like when all the other kids are playing soccer or basketball or kind of whatever they do, I'm getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go and sing psalms and arias and whatever. And that, and that kind of grates you, and you get victimized for that, or at least I certainly did, in the schoolyard. And it kind of cuts you off from some of the social norms of that, kind of upbringing as well. But that, again, I look at that now as one of the cornerstones of my childhood, and the ways that I benefited from that were immense. But from a leadership perspective, it was very straightforward. It was command and control. I'm the most experienced, I'm one of the older boys, you do what I say and you follow what I do. Very straightforward. And when I was leaving the choir master reflected on this anecdote of, we were doing a TV broadcast and he sent the younger boys out into the kind of like little kind of grassy knoll that was just to the side of the church. And he said, look, whatever you do, keep them quiet. The mics are going to pick up everything. We're doing this particular thing with the adults, with the gentlemen of the choir. You've got to keep them quiet. Whatever you need to do, just keep them quiet. And he came outside some 15, 20 minutes later to find us playing football, soccer, in silence.
Wow.
And this was a group of like 20 kids, where I at 11 was one of the older ones. Some of the younger ones would have been 6 or 7. And he said he couldn't believe his eyes, let alone his ears, that this was even possible. And then it kind of went from there, right? So then I sort of led at a student body level. I was an elected student body leader, then going through university, and then relatively quickly, once I got sort of into professional life, I was sort of nurtured as a leader as well. But it's only, I would say, been relatively recently, sort of the last sort of 5 or 6 years or so, that I've actually really been able to, sort of look at what leadership should be, and how I should, sort of embark on that journey, and then try and sort of become the leader that I really want to be, and help others become the leaders that they want to be as well.
Yeah, that's very impressive, and I don't know from experience, but I can imagine just making it through that's definitely going to give you thick skin and make you pretty tough. But man, I can't to keep kids that age, especially that many, quiet, playing soccer on top of it, and that's impressive in itself. So that was destined for greatness there for sure. So, as we alluded to earlier, you've got a couple kick in the gut moments, and I'd like for you to share one of those with us, because what we learned from these kick in the gut moments, guys, for those of you who are new to listening, is we all have them. Bottom line up front, we're going to have more. It's just part of life. It's part of growing. It's part of learning. It's what you do with that experience that makes a difference in your life or put you on the streets. I mean, it really is that drastic. So if you would, Tim, share with us one of those kick in the gut moments and really make us feel that, and then we're going to get into, what you learned from that and what you're doing with that information.
Yeah, so I have to say, I struggle to kind of pre-craft anything. I'm the last person to script a line, but I've really, in thinking about this question, I've really, sort of explored. And not to say I've had a hard road or a tough life by any means, compared to a lot of people, but I've had a fair few of these along the way. So to try and find one and just narrow down and go, that's the most valuable learning experience for me. So what I'm going to do, if you'll allow me to, is I'm actually going to try and sort of form a response around a number of instances, but they all have one, sort of tenet to them, right? Which is bereavement. Is about death, is about the trauma that comes from that and what you learn from that. Mm-hmm. And again, to reinforce my opening statement, I look at these things in gratitude, as, sort of means through which I've been able to learn. So I've lost 2 stepmothers to cancer. I've lost two young best friends, one to a car accident, one to suicide. And then my wife and I lost a child. And that last one in particular, I don't talk about a lot, but in listening to some of your shows previously, I actually feel that if it's okay with you, I'm okay to kind of include that and to share the learnings from that as well.
Yeah, absolutely, if you're up to it.
Yeah, let's see how we go. So, I mean, look, from the mothers, Jenny and Catherine, I've learned a lot about, sort of the power of purpose and the power of relationships to really enable love to, sort of bring, very, very good people who just could never really sort of, click together to do so, right? So my parents had a very dysfunctional marriage from the outset. We kind of weathered the storm of that until such time as my dad went and sort of found a better way for him. But then through these two fantastic women, essentially they were a conduit for he and I and my brother and I to build as effective a relationship as we can have, and that's been a fantastic enabler. And it was a real trauma to lose both of them, obviously one after the other. He's not a Mormon; it was a sequence. But what I actually learned most from those two was purpose. So both of them had their own very successful careers, and then with my dad, in post-military life, had his own very successful career in security consulting. They really found their own purpose, their purpose in entrepreneurship, their purpose as parents, and looking at that journey later in life for both of them, 40s and 50s. That really enabled me as a 20-year-old young man to look at them and go, okay, so maybe this isn't a linear process here. Maybe, it is as simple as, defining values and purpose and then just kind of seeing where that takes you. From the friends, it would be purpose again. That Chris, who died in a car crash, really found his purpose. He was a guy who'd kind of wandered in the wilderness as a youngster, not successful at school, kind of found enough joy from work, but where his purpose lied was in authoring kids' books. And he finished his only book just a couple of months before he was killed. But it had taken him years just to finish that. So as kind of deeply painful and ironic as it was to lose him, the fact that he'd kind of finished something significant, really kind of for the first time, almost felt like he'd done his life's work, even though we lost him, really too young. And then Rob, was a deep, sort of best friend at school, who then took his own life, again far too early. But for him, it was really a question of finding purpose finally, and then feeling that it was going to be taken away from him, and that was just something that he couldn't reconcile. And then the final one, in the child that we lost, which was our second child, was a little boy. We lost him in utero, but that was absolutely a catalyst for my wife and I to really come together. Even as people who are very much in love and had one beautiful child already, that brought us even closer together. And it also ultimately was a catalyst, along with a couple of other hits that all came at the same time, for us to activate a life plan that always had seemed like a bit of a dream, which was to get out of the city, to move out of town, to move for a lifestyle play, and then build the means to facilitate that life, which now 3 years later, with a beautiful little girl here with us as well, who we would not have had. We were only ever going to have two kids. That was very much predefined for us. I have so much to be grateful for, and I can look at the loss of our little boy and just sort of say, well, okay, that is what it was. That was beyond everyone's control, and it's now allowed us to do and be something that we otherwise absolutely would not be.
Yeah, well, definitely thanks for sharing that, because I know it's going to touch a lot of guys and a lot of men and women out there listening, incidentally. It's about 50-50 split on men and women listeners, believe it or not, which is kind of cool. Very cool to me indeed. But it's definitely going to touch the hearts of a lot of people. I personally have a high school friend who lost his just an amazing young man in a motorcycle accident. He was a motocross racer, and that's what he did. And Kenny did himself as well when he was younger. And then my brother actually lost his oldest son. Got hit by a car, and it was just an instant. Wow. It's very, very tough to deal with. Even from my perspective, I can't even imagine from the parents' perspective. I mean, I can, but I just can't feel it the same. So I definitely feel that. And all of that, like you said earlier, everything is a learning point. Even from my perspective, I find it hard to get a learning point from losing a child. I couldn't imagine it. I'd be like, what could I learn from that? It just doesn't calculate for me. But everything makes us who we are. And God bless you and your family for going through that, and everybody else for that matter, because it touches a lot of people, does it not?
And it does. And again, you go through these experiences, and we haven't done therapy or anything like that, but just sharing this normally and obviously much more closed and sort of proximate and personal interactions, but you'd be amazed how many people have got a very similar journey. And one of my close mentors, who I'd known for a decade, saw me just a month or so after we lost a little one. And he had exactly the same experience. Had a son, had then lost the second pregnancy at an advanced point, very, very similar situation to us, had been able to reconcile that, and then had a little girl as effectively the third child, and the two survivors. And again, that shared experience has brought us closer together, and we've been able to, tune in even more than we had after a very long, successful professional relationship. There's, like I say, it's been by far and away not, kind of a, silver spoon adventure. There's been dices with death for myself. There's been plenty of, sort of slaps in the chops and punches on the jaw professionally, personally outside of all that stuff. But, I listened to some of the responses from your other guests, and I wanted to be equally sincere.
I appreciate that. I really do. And a lot of learning going on there, and a lot of I just greatly appreciate you sharing that. Because, again, it just points out the fact that, we're all on our journey and we all have hardships, and we got to go on with life. That's what the people that, leave us too soon, I believe, would expect us to do.
100%.
Yeah, because that's what I would expect them to do, for sure. Wow. So, how are you paying it forward? What are you doing with all this information, all these experiences that you have in your life, this amazing leadership ability that you have and traits? What are you doing with that? How are you paying it forward?
So, again, there's a couple of ways. The major one is really taking a stand around who is it for? Who is our work for? And this has been an evolving process. But about a year ago, I working with a coach, I finally kind of got to a point of just kind of getting right down into the core of me, and why do I get out of bed in the morning, and why do I do this work, and why do I why I'm on this journey of leadership, and ultimately that is about making the world better. And that sounds like the most, sort of grandiose and sort of self-aggrandizing, arrogant statement. I'm making the world better. But, I do the small amount that I can personally. But it is actually saying, well, I could go and make a truckload of cash working with all comers. Just taking a pure scale approach, just kind of like loading the wagon every day and just going out to sell whatever I can to whoever wants it. Or I could just target where the money is, going at organizations and institutions that I don't believe are making the world better, but just go and sell to them, and they've got lots of cash, so they can give some of it to me. But I've actually really made this very explicit now, and it's kind of at the cornerstone of everything that we do. When we're marketing and when we're onboarding clients, is to say we work with leaders who are making the world better. You tell us how you're making the world better, and we want to help you do that. So that's the biggest way, and it really is about accelerating the process that they do that and amplifying the impact that they'll have as they do that. So that's kind of the big one. And then how, ways in which we do that. I have always been happy to share everything I know with anyone that'll listen. And obviously I have to charge some people for doing that because I have to feed the family. But what I've gotten a bit better at in the last, even just 6 months, but probably 2 years, is getting over my own imposter syndrome and out of my own head and listening to the customers who actually tell me how much I'm helping them, and then putting some more of that information out into the world and just leaving it there for whoever wants it. So, as a group, and I publish a lot of my own sort of thoughts and ideas, in our insights, sort of area. And I'm now starting to put more and more of that stuff in YouTube. So again, it's there for all comers. And even, something as sort of, like sort of arbitrary as a newsletter. But what I do in a monthly newsletter is I literally just kind of download all of the most valuable content that I've consumed that month in terms of what have I listened to, what have I watched, and what have I read. And I just go, here you go. And that's really easy for me, and occasionally get asked by people, how do you have time to consume all this stuff? And are you really like checking all this stuff? And I'm like, yeah. No, I only put stuff in the newsletter that I've read and enjoyed, or listened to or enjoyed, or watched and enjoyed, and felt that I've learned something from. And it's easy for me because I love what I do, and I've found my purpose. So I'll consume all this stuff just for myself. Then I get the benefit of consuming it, so I can help refine my contribution and apply it to my customers. And now I just want to share it with everybody. Yeah. So that's there, and that's called the kit bag, the leader's kit bag. And then the final way is, I try, as much as I can to, share, the revenues that we do generate with leaders who need it most, with people in less, sort of fortunate positions, wherever they may be in the world, and also do our own bit to make the world better. So I partner personally with Scott Harrison's organization, Charity Water, and I donate personally to them. And I've spent some time in those kind of parts of the world, and I understand how vital as a fundamental resource that is to provide people with a clean source of water. It's pretty hard to lead or pretty much do anything else, when your kids are dying of dysentery because they have to drink from a dirty pond, right?
Oh, for sure.
And then the other one that we partner with at a corporate level is a really great organization called Business for Good. And they have a system called B1G1, which is a very simple, every product, every service, you donate a portion of that revenue to, and then you can select from a really broad range of projects, and all of the money that you donate goes immediately to the front line of that project. And they really do a lot of work to source and build partnerships with, not-for-profits and high-impact, sort of local projects that are working with really, sort of great people who just don't have access to capital. And whether that's to, educate, sort of women in a culture that doesn't normally advocate for that kind of thing, or to work on an environmental project or a commercial entrepreneurial endeavor or whatever it is. So we kind of allocate those depending on, the most appropriate, sort of revenue stream to generate the funds that are required for a project.
Man, that's huge. And you're doing quite a bit for paying it forward. I greatly appreciate that. Yeah, and Scott Harrison does a great job with his business, as I understand it, because when I first got introduced to his business model, a buddy of mine, Mike Dillard, was donating to it. And you can donate to two different sides. There's two parts that you can donate to, the business side,
that's right,
and the charity side, and 100% is going to go to accordingly, which is absolutely, and that's another just amazing story in itself on how he started that business.
Yeah,
love it. Yeah, great causes to give to, man, and great way to pay it forward. I absolutely appreciate that, and man, just keep doing it. That's awesome.
Thank you. We will.
I'm sure you will. So speaking of that, as a matter of fact, we are at the point where we are going to pay it forward. Well, before we do that, I want to get into the pay it forward round. But before we do that, what does it look like when you're working with somebody, as far as whether it's paid or not, and you're working with somebody or a group of people, and what you do for the leadership side? What does that look like? And who are your ideal clients? Who's the people you like to work with?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. So, I mean, look, as an organization, everything that we do is paid, with the exception of go read this stuff that we put out there in the world anyway. And if that's enough for you, great, good for you. And, kind of come back to us, when you've got a more complex challenge to wrestle with. So essentially, with the starting point of, leadership's about making the world better. And why is that? I mean, I reflect, and did reflect long and hard to get to this, kind of conclusion that all of the instances in my life that I could look at and go, either that was awesome, that was the greatest experience, whether it's business, life, whatever, or that was dreadful. And that really did nothing for me, or it actually took from my experience. I could actually isolate both of the sides of that spectrum down to the leadership that was involved in producing that outcome. So whether that was an early job as a poolside lifeguard, as a teenager, noticing a physical and emotional change in the staff when the shift manager would change, and that how quickly that flowed down literally to the safety of the people that were paying money to bring their families and have fun in the water. All the way through to my early experiences being led and working with managers, and just how much more productive for the organization and how much more beneficial I was for my customers when I was being well led, or when I was being led by someone who did nothing for me and I had no respect for, and they just made my life harder. And then from a paying it forward perspective, I've certainly experienced that, when you're being ridden by someone who really doesn't live, by a value system that in any way aligns with yours, and they just seem to want to do everything to make your work life miserable, you don't have any time to give back to your community, and you don't have any headspace for gratitude, because you're just in, base Maslowian hygiene survival mode. I've just got to get through the day, And I therefore, kind of deduced, well, it all comes down to leaders, and it is leaders' ultimate opportunity and responsibility to, at an individual human level, fully actualize people, make their workplaces safe and supportive and empowering, and to an extent, optimistically, let human nature play out that we're fundamentally not terrible people, and we will all come to, sort of do our individual bit to make the whole thing better. So that's the fundamental premise. And then how we do that is we've got an organization with practitioners right around Australia, and we've got a growing team in America, based out of LA, and we have 5 practices. It starts with providing objective data, what we call clarity, that essentially shows you where your organization's at from a leadership performance perspective. And then we go, okay, so now what do you need based on what is the outcome that you want? How are you making the world better? What's that specifically look like in terms of a commercial outcome? And how do you make money through making the world better? Because that's kind of important. And then how do we best help you do that, either as coaches or as consultants, or bringing more people to you as recruiters, or helping your people learn through training or through online systems. And we just apply exactly what's required, and then we verify that with another objective measure at the back end.
Very nice. Yeah, thanks for breaking that down, because a lot of people, a lot of guys are like, yeah, maybe I do need that kind of assistance, coaching, consulting, you name it, but they're not sure how it works. And I find that a lot in my own practice. They're like, what does that look like? What can you do for me? You don't even know my industry. I'm like, I know leadership. I know business strategies. I know marketing strategies.
Yeah.
It's basic pretty much. We can cater it, but yeah, that's brilliant. I love it.
And all of it for us is driven through values, right? I mean, we put our values front and center. We're very explicit about them, but it's not just about having them on a website, having them on a poster on the wall. It's actually sitting down at the beginning of every client engagement and going, okay, this is the experience consistently that you will get with us because of the values that we have. We are 100% committed to the cause. So you're going to get a hell of a lot of engagement. And are you sure you're ready for that? Because it basically means that once we begin, we don't desist. We care genuinely, sincerely, with a huge amount of purpose. And that means that we are going to challenge you. And we want you to care at least as much as we care. And we're courageous. So we're going to challenge you. And that's going to be uncomfortable. Because as you would know as a military man, courage comes after fear. Right? So if you're not really confronted with something that you may have been aware of, or you may not have prioritized, and that's a bit of a oh dear moment, then you can be courageous, and then you can get into it. So we'll help you along that journey, and we also have complete integrity. So we will give you barefaced honesty, which means a lot of the time you may not like what we're saying, but we're the opposite of yes people. Everything is underpinned by those values. And again, if that sounds wrong, and if you're sitting there listening to this as a leader going, I know what my values are, but they're kind of separate to what I do in my work, and business's values, I'm not sure that they're mine. I would say we're not for you.
Yeah.
Or at least if you don't want the two to align and you don't want your business to live through values, then we're not for you.
Yeah, it's good to definitely draw that line for sure. Excellent, man. So we're at this point where you're going to pay it forward to our listeners. Ready to do that?
Yeah, man. Let's go.
Excellent. So share 1 to 3 actionable steps that Men of Abundance can take today.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I didn't intend this, but the segue is pretty easy. It all comes down to values. Like the first thing that you can do with no further interjection from anybody is define what your values are. And there's lots of tools, on the internet that are available. There's lots of TED Talks on this kind of stuff. But kind of get into at a fundamental core level what your values are. And you'd be surprised the number of times I sit down with a leader of the business and they tell me that one of their primary values is profit, and that they have to deliver a profit return to their investors and shareholders. And I listen to that, and I try to manage the curtness, but it's a very direct response of essentially no. Profit is an outcome of you fully living your values, and that your customers' experience reflects that, and they keep coming back and spending their money with you, and that's where your profit comes from. If you start with profit, effectively you've got a self-deprecating system that's going to eat itself at some point. So define your values, point 1. Point 2 is then essentially sort of write out and agree with yourself a framework of behaviors, specific things that you do or do not do based on what your values are. And then the third thing, and again, you can fully internalize this, but I recommend making yourself accountable, and invite feedback on how you're living your values through your behaviors, through the actions that you take, and invite feedback from your spouse, from your friends, from your team, from your customers. Make that declaration and then ask people to hold you accountable for it. And that is actually the way that I personally have found the most success and fulfillment, and the customers that I work with find exactly the same.
Yeah. Paramount, man. I love it. And the thing about the values is I totally agree with you. I've been that person. I've started a business based solely on the sole purpose of making money. And when you do that, you'll do whatever it takes. And whatever it takes isn't always a good thing. Not that I did anything wrong, but the thought process is there. And that's how a lot of people get into trouble. But yeah, and then when it comes to values, also you have institutional values, and you have your cultural values, and you have your personal values, and those sometimes clash. So, and this is something that we deal with in the military, because when you come into a large organization, regardless of what your personal values are and the values you got from your culture growing up, you now have core corporate values that you have to abide to, or else. And hopefully the corporate values are good.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. And I agree with you, but I also have a not a contention, I think, but just a caveat. And let's explore that and see if it is a contention or not.
Absolutely, that's what I love to do.
That everybody should bring their values to the party, and the key to organizational success is having enough congruence of personal values, that when you define what your organizational values are, enough people will get behind enough of them that the whole thing can really bloom and blossom, and that you have this gravitational pull of great people want to come and work with you because they align with your values, and that customers want to come and spend money with you because they align with your values. And the whole thing actually really becomes a very powerful, attractive force. But where the shift is, and I think this is where the bridge is between sort of the perspective across what values should be different, personal, institutional, cultural, is that for me, if the values are fundamentally misaligned, you're never going to get a high performance environment. But where the values are aligned enough, the difference that's acceptable is the prioritization of the values. So you might be sitting there and go, well, look, teamwork is great, and teamwork's the number one organizational value, and I can subscribe to that up to a point, but teamwork's value 3, collaboration's value 3 for me, because I need to put family first, and then learning, because I just have to keep getting better, and then I'm happy to collaborate. So again, as long as the alignment's there and it's kind of like you can overlay them, that's good. But if collaboration is not one of your personal values, then don't join a business that says that it's one of ours.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a very good point. Very well said. And it's extremely important to consider that as you start creating an even more diverse organization. I just get giddy when I think about the values and the benefits of having a very well diverse team and organization, from gender to cultural, from around the world, because then you get so many amazing different perspectives on a project that, I mean, you just can't help but win as long as it can all come together.
Yeah. And look, I think, absolutely, organizations should have governing virtues, as organizational values. But certainly in the work that we do, what we actually find sort of really drives performance is values being shared at a small group level. And whether that's a team or it's a business unit, or it's a project team, or it's a strike force or whatever it is, that where the relationships are most sort of codependent and interrelated, that's where the most overlap of values needs to be. Right?
Yeah.
Like, so you can have a kind of a distal view that, I really like where the business is going overall from a values perspective and where we're going, but actually the team that I'm in, they're all about something that their values prioritization is very different to mine. Therefore, I'm going to underperform, because the environment that I'm in at a personal level and a human level every day, I'm kind of grating against stuff that I intrinsically don't really agree with. And then my, kind of participation starts to get reduced, and my level of engagement with my work and my contribution to customers starts to be reduced. And then I either transfer out of the team, which is not necessarily high productivity outcome for the team, or I leave the organization overall because I disagree with the team, not disagree with the business.
Right. Yeah, all very, very good points. So what rituals make the biggest impact in your life?
Yeah, so I think for me the biggest impact is a question that I ask myself as often as possible, which is it is a commercial one, and it's essentially every time I'm considering a solution or a new product or sort of a service line that we want to refine. I just ritually ask myself this sort of cascade of questions, which is, how will this thing, whatever this thing is, allow customers to transform, and in transforming and changing what they do to make the world better? And why will this work better than something that they've been trying before? And then how does this reflect and renew my values and our organizational values? And obviously the organizational values of the client that we might be working with. And to sort of internalizing that question and making that like a kind of a consistent mantra, that's been really valuable, just to sort of enter, the mindset of the customer constantly and really sort of kind of check ourselves that we are serving them and that we are adding contribution and that we are actually doing it for us through them. Right. And then look, I mean, the kind of the normal stuff, that a lot of people, in entrepreneurship and leadership talk about. I mean, I have a morning and an evening ritual, and then I'll have a kind of a transitional ritual. So in the morning, it's three things. It's hydration, it's meditation, and it's movement. So I'll drink, kind of a couple of pints of water first thing I do when I get up. And that hydration by itself, is quite stimulating from a metabolic perspective for me. And then I'll have a short period of just internal reflection. And I just use the label of meditation because most people understand what that is. But I don't necessarily sit there, with my gong, kind of get into it. I just sit down, be still, and just kind of rest and just, kind of get into myself for a few minutes. And then I move, and that is either, something prescriptive like a yoga, sort of session. And I prefer to do that kind of thing short and fast and by myself, just off an app at home. Or I'll go out for a walk, or I'll get in the pool and go for a swim, or, if I've got lots of energy and the kids have had a good night's sleep and therefore so have I might get on the bike or on the trail and go for a run. And then the opposite end of the day, it really is all about a ritual that prepares me for the best night's sleep I can get. So that's about down regulating. It's about blue light glasses if I'm working late. It's about spending time with Belle and having that kind of precious decompression time together at the end of both of our, sort of active days. And then I use some, kind of topical magnesium and stuff like that just to sort of help soothe the body and sort of set myself up for a relaxing night's sleep. And then the transitional thing, I mean, this again has been one of those, kind of nuggets of leadership practice and learning that I've been doing for a while. Like at this stage, it would be a couple of years, but didn't think that it would be of any value to anybody else. So I didn't share it with anyone until I had a specific sort of reason when I was coaching a quite large listed company CFO. And she was just never able to sort of make this sort of healthy transition between work and home. And she was always kind of bringing a lot of, sort of internalized stress and sort of negative energy, sort of into the home. And then that would obviously end up in a sort of a downward spiral again. And so I offered up to her, like, look, I don't know how you would feel about this, but this is something that I do. So when I'm commuting home, I have this particular point on the road where I pull the wagon to the side and I get out of the car and I just am still for 60 seconds. And it's less of an internalized sort of meditative practice. It's looking out and it's then reflecting deliberately on the day. What was good, what was bad, what am I going to do tomorrow? And that's it, kind of 20 seconds on each. I literally start a timer on my watch, bam, 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 back in the car. And that for me is just this critical little transition. Workday done, family time begins. I've then got an extra little drive to get home, and that's just that added bit of decompression because you just cannot be the best you need to be if you're on all the time.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. I've never heard that one, but it kind of relates back to when I did the last job that I actually worked. I was in Hawaii, fortunately enough, and part of my commute home was to kayak across Pearl Harbor. So that was therapy, and it was only took about 9 to 10 minutes or so. But turtles, dolphins, the whole Nirvana, it was amazing. Just saying it doesn't even sound real, but that was my part of my day, twice a day actually. So it's really neat to be able to do that, and guys. That's very simple, something anybody could do. Decompress and before you walk into the front door. I love that ritual. That's a very good one.
Yeah, and it really, to you, it's kayaking across a, sort of a beautiful paradise, of ocean. For me, it's standing by the side of the road, looking out at a little vista. For somebody else, it might be, their walk through an urban environment that they just kind of make a little bit of time in, to pause at a stop sign or, sit in a park for, a couple of minutes or something. But I very much endorse this as a conscious, sort of transition mode between one and the other.
Wow. Wonderful. I love it. What are you reading or listening to that you'd recommend to our abundant leaders, and why?
Okay. So there's just, I mean, I'm a constant learner. So there's literally, if I had the video camera on, like there's a stack of books on the shelves and there's a stack of books on the table that are waiting to be read. So what I'm reading right now is a book by a guy called David Epstein called Range. And that really speaks to me and my personal journey, but also I think to one of the main challenges that I see and observe in leadership is really a kind of an over-expert syndrome. Where the people that get fastest promoted are the people that have got the most expertise in a particular industry or sector or function. And that what that ends up with is essentially leadership that is deficient of insight and learning and diversity and resilience that comes from that diverse experience. And what this guy has really shown, and it's an empirically based sort of tome, is that ironic to that, the people that are actually most proficient in their own success and in driving the success of others as leaders have actually got a delineated track to get to that point of ultimate performance, whether it's in sport or it's in the world of finance. And there's anecdotes that are quite extensive. He's basically saying if all you do is one thing, it doesn't take much to kind of rock that boat, and how much can you actually teach and inspire other people. And as someone who's kind of hopped roles and hopped functions, and now building a business which is got diversity at the core of it, I couldn't subscribe to that view anymore. So highly recommend that one if you agree with any of that. The other one, which I'm not reading right now, but I've read twice and I love, and I just tell everybody about whenever I can, kind of reflects a similar theme. And that's a book called Rebel Talent by a woman called Francesca Gino, who's a Harvard professor. And Francesca speaks from a similar perspective, but it's more deliberately around creativity and innovation. So she looks at a whole host of different people, like the pilot who landed his plane on the Hudson, or a chef in Italy who trained as a lawyer and then bought a restaurant kind of on a whim, and then has become one of the most creative sort of restaurateurs in the world. And she takes a similar line that the reason why these people are as good as they are is because they've done so much and they look so far away from the main parameters and boundary lines of their expertise, and it actually enables their success, not deprecates from it. So that's the book stuff. And then listening, I mean, man, I listen to a lot of stuff, really all podcasts. So the list of favorites would be, mainly American, Hidden Brain on NPR, with a host called Shankar Vedantam. Really great content, all very interesting, very topical. Masters of Scale with Reid Hoffman, the LinkedIn founder, very business orientated, but very, very good, practical, applicable advice. And then from a Better World leadership perspective, I actually can't get far past Rich Roll, the Rich Roll podcast. And his is not ostensibly a business podcast, but he has a lot of entrepreneurs, and interesting high performance people who really have this key tenet of, trying to have a positive impact. And then there's an Australian one that I'd recommend, to the brethren overseas who may not have come across it, which is a forward-looking podcast called Future Tense, which is on the ABC here in Australia. And that's a very broad spectrum of topics, whether it's the future of energy or the future of education or, the future of, interpersonal relationships, and then interviewing a very, very wide range of mainly academic and also commercial experts in all of those fields. And if you can get through all of that, you'll be listening to about half of what I listen to.
Yeah, good luck with that. That's a lot of content to consume, man. But I love it. Great recommendations, man. What do you feel holds most people back from living a life of true abundance, Tim?
Look, I'm going to start to sound boring and repetitive here, but it's such a core tenet of mine that my response to that can't be anything other than, that you're not going to live a life of full abundance unless you have defined and are living and are being held accountable to your values. Mm-hmm. And that the biggest thing that holds people back is by shackling themselves to other people's values, that you then end up living at best in a kind of this is all right, but I know it could be better. At worst, you live in kind of fundamental opposition to. And then you get to a point in time when you just go, what the hell have I been doing with myself? Yeah. And I think that's a real tragedy, of modern life, that a lot of people are basically doing that out of obligation, out of commitment, out of I don't know what, but I think the opportunity now really is that a lot of organizations are switching on to the value of values and this powerful, attractive force of customers and good people. And it's actually a lot easier to get out there and find places to go and spend your work life that do align with your values.
It really is. It really is. Very well said. So what does being a man of abundance mean to you?
Yeah, I think for me, it's very straightforward. I think it's living your values. It's sharing as much of yourself and the value you create as you can. And then it's essentially just kind of, being a, sort of a person who's true to themselves and in doing that, can make a positive impact and make the world a bit better every day.
Excellent, man. Excellent. Thanks for sharing that, man. Great conversation. We are definitely going to have 4iLeadership.com linked up in the show notes so they can go check out more about what you do professionally. But before I let you go, what did we not talk about that you want to ensure that our men of abundance get out of our conversation today, and how else can they get a hold of you?
Okay. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground.
We certainly have.
Look, I think probably the only thing that I would say, given that we're recording this right, sort of around the kind of the festive season, is really if I could impart a request or an invitation onto anybody that's listening to this, it would be try and take some of the quiet moments that you might find over the holiday season ahead. If anything that Wally and I have talked about here lands with you, just try and spend some time and reflect on that and sort of take whatever means the most to you and then try and make something actionable from that. And in terms of where to get hold of me, I mean, the website's a great place to start, and I really would say that is the place to start. But I'm also on YouTube, and there's LinkedIn is my primary professional social platform. So come look me up there, and I'll look forward to hearing from and would be very keen to talk to anybody who has enjoyed the conversation and just wants to talk or has anything that they'd like to say and share their thoughts about value-centered leadership and all the ways that leaders can make the world better.
Excellent, Tim. We'll have that linked up in the show notes as well. So great conversation. We got very deep. We actually got into a lot of good content before we even started the show. So we'll see how we can fit some of that in there as well, guys, so you can get in on some of that. But Tim, just go out and live your life of abundance, man. Keep paying it forward because you are doing amazing things in the world, and I greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure those that are touched in one way or another appreciate it as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
My pleasure. Here's your action step for this episode, guys. It's an easy one. Share the heck out of this episode. Share any episode. Share Men of Abundance with others. During this time of year, so many people are just dwelling on their adversity and really having a hard time. They need anything that can possibly lift them up. You need anything that can lift you up. It's therapeutic. Like I said before, don't wait till things are bad. Keep this type of mentality, keep the abundance mentality in your mind, in the forefront at all times. And that way, when things do happen, you can be more resilient in that action, in that event, and you can grow from it that much quicker. Now, go out and live your life of abundance and make sure to pay it forward.
That's all for today, Abundance Leaders. For more about our guests and the powerful information we shared with you today, be sure to sign up for our mailing list at menofabundance.com. We appreciate your time and look forward to hanging out with you on our next episode. So until then, be sure to pay it forward and live your life of abundance.